for joining us on this lovely Tuesday evening. I'm super pleased to kick off our CLO event of the season with the fabulous Jackie Alling from ASU Lodestar Center, who is here to talk to you a little bit more about what she does with Lodestar, her background in philanthropy, and also how to build team leadership skills within the nonprofit space. So since we started a little bit late, I'm going to cut my intro short and I'm going to toss it right back over to Jackie to get into the good stuff.
Great. Well, hello, everybody. I just am so pleased to join you. I love that it said on the Zoom host that it was a fireside chat. And I thought that was really appropriate because it's like still well over 102 degrees in Phoenix right now. So we sort of
it's an inferno chat.
I'm so excited to talk to all of you. Jessica actually reached out to the ASU Lodestar Center to get a guest speaker. And I just wanted to tell you a little bit about what we do at the center. You can see behind me my screen that there's a piece of public art, and the art is called Her Secret is Patience, and the artist is Janet Etchel. I'm going to say her name wrong, Etchelness. And we are actually at the ASU downtown campus. So people think about ASU, they naturally think about Tempe. That's where the football games are. But there's also an enterprise in downtown, West Campus, and far East Phoenix. And then, as Jessica well knows, we have this huge subscription of online students, making us really, we have a partnership with Starbucks through her employment and the innovation of that partnership. And so we are the single largest state university in the country with all of that. I always like to tell people that we're probably bigger than most cities in Arizona. So I just thought I'd start by telling you a little bit about who I am. I am the Senior Fellow for Philanthropy at ASU. It's interesting for me because for the previous 20 years, had been working with the Arizona Community Foundation. If you know anything about that entity, it is the single largest foundation in Arizona. So I have very much a statewide perspective, which I bring to ASU. I also am an ASU alum, and I used to work at ASU before ACF. So I feel in a lot of ways that I have come home. I'm also really proud to say that we were once again awarded the most innovative university in the country. And that's something that we're equally proud of. Just the outline for today's conversation. I will try to condense the intro part a little bit, just because we did start a little late. It's just, who are we? Who is the ASU Lodestar Center for Philanthropy and Nonprofit Innovation? Some very, very quick basics on board governance. We do have at the Lodestar Center a pretty robust board training program that we do take and work with nonprofit boards and do that over a period of time. So I'm just going to give you a little sneak peek just to hit on those basics. And then the topic that Jessica reached out on was needing some tips on leading teams on a nonprofit board and really in the nonprofit space. So, and we'll have a chance for us to have a dialogue and some questions down the road. I just wanted to check and make sure everybody could hear me okay. Is everything good? All right, fantastic. So you may also see down here, in addition to the ASU Lodestar Center, there is a Philanthropy Matters, which is one initiative of the center. The center has been around for 22 years. This is our vision. It was very much about making our communities the best they could possibly be through impactful philanthropy and effective nonprofit practice. We build capacity in this sector by enhancing those who lead, helping with leadership skills, lots of training programs, and with a real focus on nonprofit and philanthropic organizations. But we also do work with corporations as well and governmental agencies. But the focus really is nonprofits and philanthropies, what we call the philanthropic ecosystem. And so how do we do that? It's through a broad-based portfolio of services and programs. I'm not going to read all this off to you. You can read it, but a real emphasis, we do some pretty important research in that space, obviously education and training and meetings. And so why do we do this? We rely on our nonprofit leaders and the philanthropists that provide grants and support to them to solve our biggest problems and really help our community meet its aspirations. And here's the who here. I'm not going to repeat myself again. So in a nutshell, this is not comprehensive, but yes, we do have undergraduate and graduate degrees in nonprofit management. Jessica, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you actually are a product of one of those degree programs, correct?
Sure am. This morning during our board meeting, Jackie, I was trying to figure out which school I graduated from because I was in the year of transition. So I don't know if it was College of Public Programs or Watts or
Right.
community or whatever it ended up being, but I have the degree.
So for those of you that are familiar with the innovation that is Michael Crow and his talented team, there is a branding process that goes on that really renames a lot of the colleges. And so some of them, like I worked for the College of Fine Arts before, and it is really unrecognizable. You can't find it anymore. I can't even remember what the name is, but that is part of the innovation. It's about reinventing ourselves over and over again because our communities are changing in every aspect of what we do. We also have a nonprofit management training program for professionals that find themselves running a nonprofit. Maybe they didn't, like Jessica, go into studying how to do this. They maybe had an accounting degree or an engineering degree, or like me, a fine arts degree, and then found themselves years later because of their passions and their drive running a nonprofit. And there's a lot of technical things that people need to know about in terms of budgeting, in terms of running a board of directors, in terms of volunteer management. And so this is a program for existing nonprofit professionals to go back and sort of do pick and choose, if you will, the kinds of services, fundraising, grant writing, board development, whatever it is that they really want to shore up in their own expertise in development. And it's a very, very, very popular program. I say one of our most popular. We run conferences and forums on key topics, including philanthropy. And then we do have research projects, one of the most well-used ones. We talk, and I should say that Jessica is on our leadership council, the Lodestar Center, because we are a part of the university. We actually fall under the Board of Regents. So that's our actual fiscal board, our fiduciary board. But we have a leadership council that just focuses on us, our operations, who act as our advocates. So while they're not technically a legal board, we treat them as our board, and we really rely on them to do most of those functions. So welcome, Jessica, because I think today was your first meeting, if I'm not mistaken. So one of the important research projects we do is a nonprofit compensation study. Often boards or executives will have a position, they'll say, well, what would we pay somebody who does that? But what this study does is it queries all of the nonprofits in our state, and we get surveys back about all the salaries that are being paid across the continuum of the nonprofit sector. We make that available for those looking to answer those kinds of questions. And then we also have very special nonprofit capacity building initiatives. I'm not going to go into detail on any of those, but I would invite, if anybody's interested, I've left my contact information at the end. Happy to talk to you more about all of this, or go to our website and have a look. So these are our three pillars: educate, empower, and connect. So just some basics about what a board member does. I realize that some of you are on the board. If I'm not mistaken, not everybody is. Is that correct, Jessica? Did I get that right? Okay.
Yeah,
but at some point in time, you're going to be on a board.
Our president right now is Jenny Elser, and she's on. And then our EVP is Liz Goldstein, who's on. And then most of the attendees here are either on, they're active members in the league, but they may be on committees or different boards out in the organization. So looking at different life cycles of their engagement in philanthropy.
Okay. So you've all at some point had some touch point with being involved with a board, or will in your lifetime, or, are a staff member or a volunteer working for a board, working with a board somehow. But really the big, this is actually excerpted from some of our training, but the big role of a board member is to be a champion, an advocate. And when you think about the word advocacy, a lot of people think it's political, but it comes from the Latin term to give voice to. And so it's really to speak about this organization and represent them out in the world, and support be a real ambassador, support their mission-driven work. There's some legalities to being a board member too, that anybody that accepts a board post should be well aware of, because there's some ramifications and there's some serious things that you should know about this. You are, as a board member, a fiduciary. You have responsibilities in terms of the financial management, and really watching the assets of the organization, the investments, the administration, making sure that those things are all as they should be. Reasonableness, and that's like, well, of course everybody would be reasonable, but you read all the time or hear all the time about board members that have their own agenda, or maybe they join a board because they want to change the way the organization is running. And really, when they accept a board position, they should agree to be rational, reasonable, really be equitable, and take a moderate approach to really keep this enterprise running smoothly and safely. And then there is a public responsibility. When you think about a 501c3, that is a tax-exempt organization. And the reason it's a tax-exempt organization is because its contribution to the common good, the public good, is so great. It goes through this test of contributions to public good. It's so great that the government determines, yes, indeed, the payout of social good is so good that there's the tax exempt, and we are going to rule that you are a nonprofit. So boards need to be very responsible and accountable to the public for that reason. It's a big post. And then again, prudence in terms of not making crazy, reckless decisions, as you would your very own investments. Don't do something crazy or super risky, or even if you would for your own, take a more prudent approach, because these are, assets for the public good that are set aside to do mission-driven work and solve a lot of problems. So here's 3 basic pillars. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these. They're very high level, but just to walk through, what do these things mean? Duty of care. Number 1, be informed. You're going to sit on a board, it's dangerous not to pay attention to what's really going on and not showing up or not reading the materials sent from the staff and the board committees that are overseeing maybe the finances, the audits, the actual work that's happening out in the community, and delegate. Then duty of loyalty. So many of us wear so many hats. We're complicated networks. We are married to certain people. We sit on different boards. We are, we're employees. We're parents. We're spouses. It's complicated, and there's a lot of different touch points. And so, just when Jessica and I talked several days ago, we have this connection with all these different organizations we had in common. This is very normal, but it makes it a murky marketplace in terms of conflict of interest. You may be thinking you're doing the right thing by advocating, hey, this great organization should merge with this one, and I sit on both these boards, but it may benefit one more than the other. But be aware of which hat you're wearing and what table you're seated at. And because of that, it's really important that boards have policies that both the directors and the staff sign, disclosing potential conflicts. Insider transactions, what that's more maybe on the corporate side, but it does exist. Especially, I worked for a long time for a grant making organization, and we would hear of donors setting up new funds with certain priority areas. And if a board member who had to approve was accepting those funds said, hey, before this is public, I sit on this animal welfare board, and I just learned this new donor is giving grants to animal rights groups. I'm going to tell the executive director over here real fast before it's public so they can get in. And, that's confidential information. Until that grant making opportunity goes public or is posted on the website or the donor makes the public aware of it, that board member should really hold back and not share that insider information. So that's sort of a nonprofit context. So confidentiality for sure. And then finally, I think people are the most familiar with this. The articles of incorporation are really sort of the roadmap of the bylaws of the organization, the mission statement, why they exist. This is their guiding star, the North Star. And then, of course, the exempt status, which I talked about earlier. Core responsibilities. I'm not going to go through all of these. I think some of these are very, very practical. One I did want to talk about, well, resources. Obviously, when I say resources, we think about contributions, not just in terms of writing a check. It's time, it's talent, it's treasure for sure. Everybody, money's great, especially for nonprofits, but it's not everything. And then also testimony, representing an organization well out in the community, being a spokesperson. And another very interesting thing is how important a board is in terms of being the boss of the chief executive. That's one of the number one most important things a board can do is they can hire a new CEO, fire a CEO when necessary, step in for a CEO during an interim period, and oversee the succession planning. And that is something in all my experience that I'm sad to say 35 years in the nonprofit sector, that is the one area that often board members really don't take as seriously as they should. It really is an important part of their job. And then, of course, engagement is all around, not just the board. It's also part of the CEO, the executive leadership, and the staff, volunteer, and also paid staff. So that's a lot. I'm going to take a breath. And I'm going to dive into the engagement part, but I'm going to stop for a second. And are there any pressing questions about what I just ran through before I get kind of into more of the engagement of teams piece of this, which I'm going to probably spend the most time on?
I don't see any questions in the chat, but feel free to come off of mute if you have a question. We'll just give it about the virtual pause, which I'm told is an uncomfortable 15 seconds.
Okay. Well, and so here's if you were just to print out one slide about, board responsibilities, this is probably the easiest one to remember. Show up. Go sit at the table, be present, give your all to that entity at the time that you're doing it. And it's not only is it important for the organization, it's, you've got some legal responsibilities. So you really want to pay attention. You really do. Okay. So when Jessica said to me, tips for leading teams on nonprofit boards, and I realized that is broader, like not just board members, but volunteers as well. I did what every expert does. I Googled it. I have a lot of ideas about this, but I thought maybe there's some kind of structural, guideline. And sure enough, the Forbes Nonprofit Council came out with what I would, if I were to sit down and write out a list of things you should do and try to provide some scope and sequence to it. I thought it was pretty darn good. There were some things I hadn't thought about, and there were a few things I thought about that they didn't include, but for the most part, I was thought it was pretty comprehensive. They got these tips by surveying a variety of high-level CEOs all over the nation, and they all contributed something, which I thought was interesting because you had different perspectives and whatnot. So this is all 13 bullets. I'm going to go through each one with a different slide with sort of some more content and material for you. But if you wanted to print, if you wanted something in a nutshell, this is the slide that has it all. Okay, so I just did that in case you want to print one slide and stick it somewhere. If anybody even prints anything anymore. So I think this one's a real no-brainer, but it's actually the #1 thing that hangs us all up all the time in so many aspects of our life, but certainly in terms of effective working as an effective team. Start in the very beginning by promoting concise and consistent communication. If you see there are potential barriers down the road or at the onset, address those right at the get-go. Do it early on, as early as you become aware of it. And also survey your team. What's the best way to submit information? Is it emails? Is it, Slack or Teams? Of course, eventually maybe we'll be more in person. That's certainly more effective for other people. But just get a sense of what is the preferred method of communication. And if it isn't working, you find some hiccups, do something right away to address it, because if you get too far down the tracks with all this misunderstanding, it's going to derail you right from the get-go. Also start with a focus on clarity. And again, knowing what hat you're wearing and what your role is. Board members govern, their role is governance. It's very high level. A staff role is to conduct the operations. And volunteers too. I will just say volunteers and staff could sort of be interchangeable at this point in time. And so both entities need to respect and focus on their role in supporting the other entity in what they need to do. And that is something it sounds so simple and obvious, but it isn't always, because again, there's some fine fuzzy lines on all this. And it really is different depending on the size of an organization. If you have a really big board with staff, like at Arizona Community Foundation, we had 60 staff members. Well, the staff were very, very active, and the boards were very, very much at a high level of governance. But I've also sat on boards where there was maybe one paid staff member. In that case, you have to sort of assess, and some board members may step up and become more hands-on, but start with that and understand it and clarify those roles so that there isn't any confusion and miscommunication that happens down the road from that. Be proactive. Consult with at least one board member with relevant experience in the area you're looking to address. And I would say, if you have a particular project or a task force and you have a very focused, here's what we need to do, just even in a body of volunteers, who's got that expertise that you want? Reach out to them. Don't wait. Don't let them sit back here and think, well, I've got all this marketing experience, and why aren't they asking me? And they should do it this way. Be proactive. Reach out to the person that has the expertise that you want. I'm going to use you, Jessica, just because, well, you put me up to this, so I'm going to use it. I'm on the board now of Social Venture Partners, and they had a very popular program called Fast Pitch, where they really it was capacity building for lots of nonprofits of different sizes. And it really, there were partners and volunteers from the community that had very specific expertise, lots of marketing and communications expertise in particular, to work with these nonprofits to give a really effective pitch, sort of, so to speak, to an audience to see if they could win the prizes and gain some support. And Jessica's obvious, she's got a great communications background. She's in this business. We wouldn't just sit around knowing she's got that talent and not ask her to do that, right? So if you know somebody who's got this relevant experience, reach out to them. Don't wait for the board or that specific person to take the initiative, because they may come up with something on their own that isn't in line. So just from the get-go, reach out. I like this one, and this is not one I necessarily thought about. You know, everybody knows it's good to have a strong strategic plan, and that should be developed in conjunction with the board and staff, and in some cases volunteers, and supported by both. But I really like the idea of an agreement. Like, here's what I'm going to do. Here's what each entity is going to do. And everybody make an agreement to allocate resources to put that strategic plan in motion. I have seen way too often where there's these, you know, great visions and these great plans and these steps, and then the budget doesn't support them. You know, or everybody's accountable. Well, guess what? If everybody's accountable, nobody's accountable. You know, you might have team leaders that share an accountability. That's okay. But name out, you know, assign accountability to all parties. And if they're like, hey, I'm not getting to this, or this isn't happening, or we need somebody who has this to get this done, then reassign it. But just don't, hey, y'all come, y'all get this done, because it just it has a tendency to float and languish. So this is one, I would have said strategic plan, but I like the idea of an agreement and really spelling out who does what. And strategic plans don't always do that. This one, I would apply to volunteers too. Engage with board members individually. Diversity of thought on teams and boards in particular is incredibly valuable. You do not want all, you don't want all CPAs. And nothing wrong. And if they're I love CPAs so much. But you want diversity, people that have different backgrounds, different perspectives. That's how you solve a problem. That's how you get a unique task done. That's how you innovate, is really bouncing different ways of thinking off of each other. And one of the things I noticed in my years, because I was an executive director for a while, and as a chief executive at ACF was responsible for a board committee. And one of the things I noticed is some people are really different in a group dynamic. You know, they may, you know, have a certain affect when they're in a board or a group meeting. But you take them out just for coffee and get them talking, you learn so much. And they start to invest. They start, hey, somebody cared about my expertise. And, you know, there's things that you learn that they've done that you had no idea. They wouldn't stand up in a meeting and say, hey, I have a PhD in X, you know. And it's really a fantastic way to start to mobilize all possible resources and just make that investment up front. And then don't just let it hang out there between the two of you. Really figure out a way to bring that into the process and make people aware that this is that we have the skill set here. One practical point is, my background's in the fine arts and in humanities. And at ACF, I was in charge of starting an affordable housing initiative, which is really an important issue in Arizona then, and now even more so now. And I found out that one of our board members had worked for JP Morgan Chase in Manhattan and had used Community Reinvestment Act money to rebuild Harlem and make, with affordable housing and whatnot, like decades ago. Well, that wasn't obvious. It just said she was working for JP Morgan Chase. So, by going out with her and talking, and that's how I found out she had this expertise, and she helped us build that fund. But I wouldn't have known it if I hadn't talked to her about it and then drawn her into the process more officially, if you will. Ask for advice strategically. I'm a huge fan of keeping things, focused, on time, action oriented. I made a mistake as a young executive director using my board for, all kinds of things that really probably wasn't important. I just felt like they needed to know everything, and I actually had board members come to me and say, hey, that's why you have committees. That's why you have cabinets. You can call me offline, but we don't need to go through all this during a board meeting. So be very strategic. You want them to weigh in, but you also ultimately want to have it be a management decision with board support. So there's again that distinction of a management role versus sort of a governance and guidance role. And again, it's not always obvious or easy. These are things that are very nuanced. In addition to having good relationships with individual members of a team or a board team, get them talking to each other, because that's a different dynamic. Peers, and this, I would say this happens in just volunteers too. Peers have a different power dynamic or relationship with each other, and they share information in a very rich, diverse and distinct way. And that can be very, if it's not, sometimes it can be unhealthy, but for the most part, use that as a tool and provide resources and strategic opportunities for that to happen versus just, bitch session down, excuse my language, after a meeting or whatnot. It can actually be a real plus. And this bullet down below, I think it's a no-brainer, really. Look for individuals in advance who could meet gaps that your group doesn't have. Number one, how can we help people be our ambassadors? So earlier at our leadership council meeting today, we had, what was it, 4 new leadership council members. And we have a lot of people that have served on this leadership council for a long time. They were using all these acronyms, and I'm a relatively new staff member, so I'm sensitive. And somebody said, yeah, word salad, like, what does that mean? So one of the newer leadership council members said, can you provide us with some wins or a sheet or a cheat sheet or something consolidated, that like a curtain speech, or just to help us understand in layperson's terms what you're doing and why it matters. And I thought that was really, really valuable input. So what can you provide to people so they can talk intelligently to the outside world about this? Because that's going to help bring in resources. That's going to help bring in support of all different kinds. So, give them the tools to be successful in that way. And then, just don't do it and say, hey, that's all good. Things change, new programs happen. Check back and make sure that people are up to date. This one, we've sort of already addressed it. I like the swim lanes, distinguishing the roles between management and governance. Create structures for effective feedback and dialogue. I think some of that might be policies in terms of what board members should and should not do. And that's what I could mostly think of in terms of the structure, not just leaving it up to chance. Board committees are really important. Subcommittees, maybe there's a specific aspect of what a team's doing that really requires a deep dive in a certain area of expertise, or it's just too in the weeds for the group. So, feel free to segment, but keep them connected. And then always have some conduit to a committee or a team with somebody who really can perform daily tasks and keep things streamlined and connected to the actual work. And again, with board committees, staff really need to keep them up to date on the appropriate level of information, not every little detail, but the high level stuff that they need to know. And then again, just like being strategic about asking for advice, communicate strategically. If your board or your volunteers are getting a missive from somebody, even once a week is almost too much, depending on, if you have an event, because I know Junior League has events, and if you're getting closer to that, yes, maybe more communications getting up to a really important occurrence or event. But for the most part, don't inundate people. Everybody's mailboxes are way too full. Pick and choose how to communicate that and when to communicate that. That's really, really important. And I like this one. Take goal updates to the board once there are outcomes to share. That relates to that leadership council suggestion we had heard earlier today. And then clarify roles. Again, you've heard this now several times in this. I guess you can't say it enough. And there were a number of CEOs that that contributed this information. If needed, start a series of listening sessions to help groups better understand where the other is coming from. I would try to get my head around that. I think, I'm not sure what that means, to be honest with you. This was input from another CEO, but I thought I'd put it in there. There's also mediation, which is usually to help you from going off the rails. So maybe that's a stopgap measure before you get to that point. And I love create a plan for mapping out a collaborative way forward that may require some adjustments to roles. Yeah, this person, they wanted to do this, but that's just not really, they don't have time for it. Or it's maybe they're better at this. This is what they really like doing, right? And we've all experienced that ourselves. Like you think, oh, this is perfect for me, and then you're like, no. So make adjustments are okay. They're all right, just as long as there's some structure and clarity around it without just hopping all over the place. And then finally, let everyone get in the boat. This kind of sums almost all of this up. But a strategic plan where everybody, staff, board members, sponsors, and volunteers can see the direction, goals, benchmarks, and accomplishments. And then I did like this final quote from Aaron Alejandro about it being, a collaborative strategic plan. This isn't just a few people sitting in a room making up these goals. This is something that everybody gets to weigh in on, grab an oar and start rowing. I love that analogy for sure. And so I'm wrapping up here. I had heard that out of the hour, you like to really take about 40 minutes for this. So we do, I've just flown through a ton of information. And that's why, you have this deck and you have my contact information. That's my email. That's my phone number. If there's something, you want to follow up, but I'll stop now. If anybody has any comments or questions or something that we didn't touch on that you've been dealing with.
Jackie, I have a question for you. And I think that you're in a unique position because you've been staff at some large, very influential institutions, and you've worked with a lot of boards, but you've also served on a lot of boards. And so I'd love for you to maybe just spend like 3 to 5 minutes talking about the difference in how you engage versus when you're as staff, when you are in a board leadership role, and then when you are kind of in a service board role, and maybe kind of differentiate those for us.
Yeah, I think it's just always really being clear about what hat you're wearing when you're sitting at a table. Because I've just seen so much trouble happen, and there's one of the reasons you're sitting on a board. What I'm asked to be on a board is because, of who I am and what I do. So to say that's irrelevant and leave that all over here is not realistic. But what are the appropriate ways for me to bring my relationships, my expertise, my resources to bear on this organization that I'm right now serving as a board member? And yeah, it's tricky. It's very, very tricky, but that's what I always kind of go back to is, why am I sitting at this table really? And that's why the clarity around roles, I think, that was in the beginning of this is really, really important, is just to reflect and remind yourself of that. We're all relational and network human beings. We're never going to cut those things off in silos completely, right? That's not how we live our life. But just to be mindful and careful and intentional about those connections and what they may or may not mean for your work as an employee or your service as a board member. Just be aware of it. Keep it top of mind. Don't let it get away from you, because it does so many times. I've seen it actually. Really super smart people. I've seen it, get the best of them. So, and sometimes it can really hurt an organization on the staff and the board side. Yeah, it's one of the number one things when I have counseled with nonprofit executives is they spend so much time. And, for those of you in this work, it's hard work. It really is hard work. There's a lot you have to do, and it can be emotional. And dealing with the board takes up a lot of the executive's time and energy that could have been routed more toward the mission-driven work. So as a board member, you want to be mindful of that too. Like, how much are we making that person jump through hoops to take care of us? So there's definitely a balance. It's a great question. Thank you for asking it. I'm not sure I answered it completely. I think it's just be very intentional about it and keep it in mind what role you're playing.
Yeah. You mentioned this earlier on that you've seen, ACF has a paid staff of 60, and there's other organizations that have, maybe one part-time, or in the junior league case, I think we have 2 part-time staff. So What is the difference between how leadership plays a role in those aspects as well? When you have, one of the points that I saw in there, I don't remember if it was like number 9 or 10, was about collaboration between paid staff and the board. But what if it really is like the league, like junior league, and we're almost all volunteers? How do you, what is maybe some of those pieces of advice for that side of the spectrum?
Yeah.
Spectrum.
I think that's what makes clarity of roles all the more critical. Because there isn't that obvious governance staff divide. I mean, you all have to be very hands-on, clearly, with 2 part-time staff, and the nature of the organization is very volunteer-driven. So just to develop some real clarity of just, even though you're a volunteer, here's your role, and be clear about that, and be helpful. I know you all are, but we all have dealt with people that didn't understand their role and what havoc that can actually reap, or what attention it can create, right? So I would think still, even with volunteerism, making sure those roles are very clearly defined would be really pretty important.
Do you have, I'm going to put you directly on the spot. Do you have any tips or tricks for accountability when you're not paid for a role?
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, just identifying the person and having it listed in a plan. There's something about seeing your name under, a goal. And I think most of us are driven to achieve those goals. That's also why you have to make an adjustment. I mean, as a volunteer, you've got a job, maybe you've got full-time XYZ, you're sitting on other boards. And if it turns out it's not a realistic expectation, then there needs to be some clear communication about it at the right time, early on. Be proactive about it. Just say, hey, I bit off more than I can chew. And I know there's a lot of other people that are probably in the wings willing to step up when it's time is right, as opposed to when it's, the final hour. So that would be and that's why I really like this idea of having a written plan with names attached to goals. I think that's really extra important in this particular case, where you have a lot of volunteers that are accomplishing those goals, for sure.
I could probably ask you questions for the next 5 hours. I'll pause for a moment while we let others kind of chime in. And then I have just one fun question to ask you before we close out. I don't know if you'll find it fun, but I find it fun.
I tend to find most everything fun. And it's fewer things are more important, right?
Anything else pressing from y'all that you'd like to hear from Jackie? This was a lot to take in. Just so you know, this is being recorded. So as we did go through this quickly because we had a late start, you can go back and hear Jackie's comments on the different 13 aspects of leadership that she spoke about and just the different topics that she shared with us. So I will go ahead and move us into our final. So since you've had a breadth of experience across many different organizations, what are a few organizations that you can share with this group that you would recommend that they get involved in outside of the Junior League in Phoenix? So
interesting.
Maybe a hot tip for an up and coming organization. They can be large, they can be small, but if you were to pick maybe 3 that you would say go after for involvement from your personal portfolio of knowledge, what would you recommend for us?
Oh boy.
I know we won't tell them. Don't worry. We won't tell them that you left them out or that you picked them.
Well, but the problem is it really depends on the person, I mean, my first real serious board service was in arts education because that was my background. That's what I was passionate about. It could have been hell for somebody else who just wasn't interested in that topic. And, I was involved with that organization for so many years as a very hands-on volunteer board member. But that I'm going to have to just say, really think about what you're passionate about, and then, seek out the organizations that are maybe a good match for that. I have friends that are just crazy about animal welfare, and that's where they spend their time. And I wouldn't suggest they do otherwise. Now, if they said out of the animal welfare organizations, which ones would you recommend? I might have some suggestions just based on my knowledge, but boy, it's just, I think it's almost impossible. Obviously, I'm in the social venture partner board. So I'm always going to be an advocate for that. And not everybody can be a partner, but there are, ways to be involved. Obviously, I love the work that I've been doing with the Lodestar Center for sure. And one of the arts organizations, if you like social services and arts, Free Arts is a fantastic organization that I've just showed you my bias, so that's why I'm staying in this lane. I think they do amazing work. It used to be called Free Arts for Abused Children. It's a way to use the arts to really help children heal and process some of the trauma that they've gone through. And they've been around for a long time. And I was actually a peer consultant with the Arts Commission decades ago when they first got started, and I had to spend like a week reviewing them, and I was like auditing them, and I was so impressed with what they did. So that's always one I never hesitate. If you're interested in the arts and social services, and kids, that's one that kind of hits all those 3 priorities. I'm probably going to stop there because it's just too hard otherwise.
It sounds like an open invitation for all of you to use that email address right there, or
there
text
you go,
and say, I'm interested in this and I'm passionate about that. What organization should I get involved in? So there you go.
Absolutely.
That's your mail section. Okay, well, we will go ahead and close it out at this point. If y'all can just drop in the chat your first and last name, and give a huge shout out to Jackie for sharing her time with us this evening. Definitely interested in learning more from Lodestar and making sure that we figure out how to bring all of the trainings that Lodestar offers to the community to our members that are interested in them. So thank you again for joining.
Yeah. And thanks to you all for everything you do, for your service to our community. You're here and it's 7:30 at night, and you don't have to be, so just right back at you.